I was reading ESV, but that is NIV. So I realize now I should have maybe put that together, but that's fine. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? If you read this at face value, it appears to be instructions for elders in the flock, but who are the elders? What does that even mean? Who are the flock? Are we a flock of birds? Like what? What's going on? So we're going to look at the context. So the Greek term that's translated into elders is presbytery. You may hear that like the Presbyterian Church. It's somewhat similar, but the word presbytery has been used across many centuries. It was used many times in the Bible as well, but in the 3rd century BC, it referred to leaders of ancient Israel, and then in the New Testament, it referred to Jewish leaders in Jerusalem during the time of Jesus. In the 1 Peter context, it's referring to leaders of a local group of believers. So I'm going to bring us back to a little bit of context Heather shared with us a few weeks ago, so we understand this letter again, who it's going to, what's going on. So 1 Peter 1:1, it says that Peter is writing to those in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. I think we have a map. Yes, so this is who Peter is writing to. Obviously, that doesn't look familiar to us today. But like Heather mentioned a few weeks ago, the people living in these areas were from formerly conquered lands. And so what would happen is to move up the social ladder, to move up your economic status, you would move to newly conquered lands to further the Roman reach. So these are the churches Peter is writing to. Brand new, little tiny churches that are just starting to congregate. They don't have any hierarchical structure, and they were honestly just a group of people who came together in these towns. They were displaced people. So he's not writing to this structured church with a pastor and a men's ministry, a women's ministry, kids, the events. He's not writing to like the mega churches of America that have thousands of people. Frankly, he's not even writing to a church like Salt, although maybe the amount of people is the same. Salt has way more going on than these churches did. You know, we have a space, we have chairs, we have events. All of these things were not what was going on in these churches. These churches were just a bunch of people who ended up in the same town and are trying to reorient themselves to where they are. They're probably meeting in someone's house that's just actively being built, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to ground themselves in the community, and it's so important that we understand that that's who Peter is writing to, because there's such a difference and a distance between that church and the church today, especially the Church of America. So presbytery means essentially church leaders who are chosen for their spiritual maturity. Okay, so who are the elders and who are the flock for today? Like, who would we classify? Well, the short answer, everyone is kind of both. We're all elders and we're all the flock, just in different contexts. So sometimes we're elders, we're more spiritually mature, and sometimes we're around people who are more spiritually mature and can learn from them. And so the key is navigating when you are each of these and being flexible and willing to learn and to lead when it's appropriate. And so I'm going to share a short story which could always turn long. But a few years ago, I spent 3 months in Japan working as an intern at a church plant. I was in northern Japan in a tiny little town, and the missionaries there had been there for over 30 years. So they were well established, had been working with the local people. And at their church, they had people, short-term missionaries come often. So I was only there for 3 months, but they had people there for 6 months. They had other people there for shorter times. So they just had a lot of people in and out. But when I went there, I traveled there with a group of 5 other people. So there were 6 of us, but none of us knew each other prior to this trip. And in my group, I was paired with one girl named Anna. I think we have a picture of us. I think we were drinking tea. I don't really know when we took that, but Anna was studying the same program in school as me, but just at a different school. So we were doing the same thing in school. We were there for internships, and so it made sense to pair us together. So we were roommates, we traveled together, we did all of our ministry together. So it was a lot of bonding time. We got really close. But throughout our time there, we worked on so many different projects and so many different ministries. We led a high school group. we led a college group, we taught English to kindergartners, we taught English to elementary school kids. Like, we kind of did a little bit of everything, which was a lot of fun, but it also showed a lot of our strengths and weaknesses. So what made Anna and I's partnership work so well is that we were both willing to step up and lead, but also learn from each other. We were able to learn the ebbs and flows of working with one another. Sometimes she took the lead, and sometimes I did. One particular case comes to mind is she was also in school getting her TESOL certificate, which is teaching English as a second language. I did not know how to do that. That was not something I was learning how to do. And so when we'd work with people to teach them English, she definitely took the lead in that regard because she had the education. She knew what she was doing. And then in other areas, I took the lead. And so it was just a really good learning experience of when to let others lead and when to learn from them. And so her and I, we both shepherded each other, and then we were also one another's flock in that regard. And a quote, I think it's going to be up there, that I think perfectly sums this up is, leadership, in other words, is a bit like friendship. It's something that happens best when you're not thinking about leadership or friendship as it might be, but about whatever it is that you're actually doing together. It wasn't like we were cognitively thinking, okay, Anna's going to lead today. Okay, no, Alyssa's going to lead now. It was just how we were doing it. We made sense. We took each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we worked alongside of it. We weren't cognitively identifying, you're bad at this, so I'm going to do it. That's not going to work. So we're going to go back to 1 Peter. I'm going to get a drink first. So in verse 2, Peter instructs those who are elders to be shepherds to God's flock that are under their care, watching over them. So the analogy shepherds and flocks is used across the Bible so many times, but primarily though, it's used, shepherd is used in reference to Jesus. He's our ultimate shepherd, our chief shepherd, and then all of Jesus's followers are like a flock of sheep. And so I'm going to give a little background on Peter. I love that that's up there, but that's not what we're doing. So to give a little background on Peter, I know in our first week we talked about how we're not 100% sure if Peter is who wrote 1 Peter, which is a little confusing because why is it titled that then? And it could have been Peter, it could have been a scribe, it could have been someone just writing in reference to Peter. But to give you a little background on actually who Peter is, just so we can get a broader picture. So Peter was one of Jesus' disciples, obviously, but he was the one that denied Jesus 3 times, which I'm sure he is thrilled that that is what he is known for. But Jesus had told Peter, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And Peter said, of course not. That's not me. Could never. Definitely not going to happen. But it was Peter who did that, and he did deny Jesus 3 times. So jump forward. Jesus has died, he's resurrected, and now he's hanging out with his disciples again, and he's talking to Peter. And I'm going to read John 21, 15 through 17. It's not going to be on the screen. Oh, maybe it is. Okay. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. And the 3rd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. So feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. These are the 3 commands Jesus gives Peter. He entrusts Peter to do these things. So if Peter did write this letter, it's no surprise that he's using this shepherd and flock analogy because it's imagery that's used to represent the relationship we have with Jesus. Jesus watches over us, he protects us, he leads us to safety. All of these things are done by a shepherd for their flock. I don't know if any of us are super familiar with like farming techniques. I'm certainly not, but I do have learned a little bit in that the sheep recognize the shepherd, and the shepherd is there at night specifically to watch over the sheep from predators. I don't know what kind of predators were there, if it was wolves maybe, or coyotes, I don't know. But there was definitely, I don't know, there was definitely something out there that maybe would get them. And so that's why there was a shepherd to protect them and then lead them. He'd walk them around and they'd follow him. And so that's kind of the analogy, what Jesus is doing for us. So Peter is using this analogy to relay the relationship between elders and or shepherds with the flock or the local congregants. So what does Peter say a good shepherd looks like? So in his letter, he writes, there's kind of three things he points out. First, that you are willingly serving out of your own desire. Second, you are serving out of an eagerness, not out of selfish gain. And then third, that you lead by example. So each of these characterize the type of shepherd or elder we should strive to be. Now let's be clear. Just because someone has the title of elder or shepherd or pastor does not mean they automatically fit this role. It's actually sometimes the opposite. Unfortunately, a lot of people, somewhere along the line of their time in ministry, lose focus of these things. And that's why it's so important to recognize that it is not the title that calls you or ordains you. Because to be frank, I've seen these three characteristics more in people outside of, who aren't pastors or ministers or volunteers, who are outside of traditional leadership roles in church. What Peter here is describing are not leaders, but shepherds. And the point about shepherds is that the best of them aren't thinking, how can I be a shepherd, but how can I best look after these sheep? So it does not take a specific call or title to be able to shepherd others. It takes a willing heart, ready to serve out of eagerness and by example. So all it takes to be a shepherd is a willingness and humility to be used by God. You don't have to have all the knowledge, all the words, all the understanding, because frankly, none of us do. I don't think Heather, Nathan, or I would stand up here and tell you that we know it all or that we have it all together. I know exactly, or that we know exactly what to say when we're asked. I certainly don't. And honestly, it's so far from that. Half the time, I question if I even deserve to have you guys sit here and listen to me, or if I even deserve to care for you. But it doesn't matter what you or I feel we do or do not deserve. It matters that we are willing and humble enough to accept what Jesus is leading us to do. And sometimes that's shepherding, and sometimes that's being part of the flock. So seeing that it is Palm Sunday, I wanted to tie in the story of that day and its significance and what we can tie together. So we're going to read a longer passage from John 12 where Jesus is coming into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. The next day, the great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, "Do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt." At first, his disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. I'm going to skip down to 23 now. Jesus replied, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Anyone who knows their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven. "I have glorified it and will glorify it again." The crowd that was there and heard it said it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus said, "The voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. The crowd spoke up. "We have heard from the law that the Messiah will remain forever. So how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man?" Then Jesus told them, "You are going to have the light just a little while longer. Walk while you have the light, before darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where they are going. Believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light." When he had finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. That was a lot. So we've said and know that Jesus was the good shepherd, or the chief shepherd, the ultimate shepherd. But it wasn't just his title as the Son of God that made him the good shepherd. Jesus became the good shepherd by the way he loved others, the way he served others, the way he lived his life, and the way he taught others. He met all the criteria we mentioned that Peter had spoke about, but he far preceded those criteria. He served willingly. He served out of eagerness and not out of selfish gain, and he served by example. Jesus was willing to be used by God. As he rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, 2,000 plus years ago, he knew what awaited him at the end of the week. He knew that the cross was coming. He wasn't dumbfounded at the end of the week. He knew what was going to happen, and yet he still was going to go. He knew that that's what God had asked him to do, and so he was willing to do it. Jesus served out of his own eagerness to save those around him. He didn't come down to earth to make a name for himself. And if he did a really bad job. He spent his time with sinners, with the sick, with the outcasts, all people who had no sway in the community, who couldn't, go and vouch for him. Those people he was spending time with didn't have any sway or vote or anything. And that's who he chose to spend time with. So then you move to Palm Sunday, as the people cheer Hosanna as he rides into Jerusalem. They're so excited that their Messiah has come. They had expected him to be a king, to be the political ruler that they'd been waiting for, to get them out from Roman rule. Even in those verses, they say the law that the Messiah will remain forever. That was their expectation. Here comes the Messiah coming to save us. We're all going to be gone from the Romans, and he's going to rule, right? But that's not what Jesus was coming to do. Jesus was exactly the opposite of what they expected. Not only was he the opposite, but he refused to be anything other than what God asked him to be. He wasn't going to change who he was and the way he led his life to fit better with what was expected of him. He wasn't going to do a 180 and decide, well, now I'm coming into Jerusalem, so I'm going to start being the king. He wasn't going to do that. And the same goes for us, that we don't need to bend over backwards to become what we think those around us are looking for, what you think a shepherd should look like. Oftentimes, the ideas of what a shepherd should look like weren't even from God. They're made up by our culture and our history. That's why so many people, in the larger church look at pastors and think they're great or that they have it all together, which is so not the case. We're all still human. And it's such an important example that Jesus refused to be anything other than what God asked him to be. A quote that I love is that God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the call. So it's not like you have to have all the ducks in the row before Jesus can use you. You don't have to have all of your own figured out. You have the perfect little packaged life and say, okay, God, now I'm ready to be used. Because then none of us would ever be used by God because we're never going to have it all figured out. But 1 Peter 5:2, to tie it back, says, "Be shepherds of God's flock that are under your care, watching over them." So the people, the flock in your care, if you could think about them, who has God entrusted you in your care? Maybe that's your family. Maybe those are your friends. It could be anybody. But think about in those areas how you can care for them. Not how you can be a leader or how you can be the best shepherd, but how you can care for those people around you. And then think about the ways in which you can be the flock. Where are people put in your life to shepherd you? Who cares for you? And you can think about what can I learn from them? What example are they setting? because those are the two ebbs and flows that we talked about, the discerning of when you can be the flock and when you should be the shepherd. And you want to learn where God might be calling you in each moment. Will you pray with me? Jesus, thank you so much that you give us the opportunity to both shepherd and be shepherded, that we are both called to care and to be cared for. I just thank you that all you ask of us is that we're willing, that we don't have to have all the qualifications or all the knowledge, but just a willing heart to step into what you are doing in our lives and step into caring for others around us. I just pray that as we go out today, that we would just remember you walking into or riding into Jerusalem so many years ago, knowing what was coming, knowing that the cross awaited you, and yet you still did it because you were willing and humble enough to be used by God. So we thank you and we love you. Amen.